The courtroom froze. Tyler's words cut through the silence like a blade. My father is lying. His father's face twisted in shock. The judge's gavel slammed down, and gasps filled the room. In that moment, everything changed. But what happened next shocked everyone even more. Let's start from the beginning. The judge's gavel slammed against the wood, demanding silence, but the damage had already been done. Whispers spread like wildfire, a wave of shock rolling through the room. James Hutchins sat frozen, his grip tightening around the armrest of his chair. His jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed something else: panic. Tyler felt his heartbeat hammering in his chest, but he kept his gaze steady. He knew there was no turning back. Mr. Hutchins, the judge's voice cut through the murmurs. Are you aware of what you're saying? Yes, Tyler said, forcing his voice to remain firm. I know exactly what I'm saying. His father finally snapped out of his stunned silence. He shot up from his seat. Tyler, James hissed, voice sharp like a blade. You're confused. We talked about this. Tyler swallowed hard but didn't look away. No, Dad, you talked. You told me what to say, but I can't lie. The judge narrowed his eyes, shifting his attention from Tyler to James. Mr. Hutchins, sit down. James hesitated. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he obeyed, lowering himself back into his chair with slow, calculated movements. The courtroom remained silent, everyone waiting for what would happen next. The defense attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Emily Carter, leaned forward. Tyler, she said, her tone even, controlled. Are you saying that your testimony was influenced? Tyler exhaled, his fingers gripping the edge of the stand. He turned to Richard Quinn, the man his father had branded a criminal for years. Quinn looked tired, not like a guilty man, but like someone who had been fighting too long. Yes, Tyler admitted. My father told me exactly what to say, but it's not the truth. Another round of murmurs. The prosecutor, who had been confident a moment ago, suddenly looked uneasy. Then tell us the truth, Emily pressed. What really happened? Tyler felt the weight of his father's glare on him, but he blocked it out. His hands curled into fists as the memories flooded back. His father's study, the unlocked drawer, the papers that shouldn't have existed. The transactions, the missing money, the offshore accounts. Richard Quinn didn't steal from the company, Tyler said, voice steady. My father did. Gasps erupted again, louder this time. James shot up from his seat once more. Enough! His voice thundered through the room. The judge's gavel slammed down again. Mr. Hutchins, sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt. James's face turned red with fury, but he sat, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles went white. Emily leaned in. How do you know this, Tyler? Tyler's mouth was dry, but he forced himself to continue. I found the bank statements in his office. I recognized the account numbers, ones he told me never to touch. I saw the transfers, the money that went missing. It all went to him. Emily turned to the judge. Your Honor, we request an immediate review of these documents. If Tyler's claims are true, this entire case is built on false pretenses. The judge adjusted his glasses. This is a serious accusation, Ms. Carter. Do you have evidence to support it? Emily turned back to Tyler. Do you have those documents? Tyler hesitated for the briefest second. They're in my backpack, he said finally. I brought them. Just in case. His father inhaled sharply. Tyler, don't. But Tyler had already turned to the bailiff. It's outside, with security. The judge nodded. Retrieve it. The bailiff left the courtroom. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. Tyler didn't turn to look at his father, but he could feel the fury radiating off him. He had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. James Hutchins had built his entire career on reputation. He was known as the man who always won, who crushed his enemies, who never lost control. But now, for the first time, control was slipping through his fingers. Minutes later, the bailiff returned, carrying a black backpack. He placed it on the evidence table. Emily stepped forward, unzipped it, and pulled out a thick folder. She opened it, scanned the pages, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned to the judge. These documents show direct transfers to an offshore account under James Hutchins' name. The amounts match exactly with what was reported missing. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge turned to James. "Mr. Hutchins, do you have an explanation for this?" James opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he had nothing to say. James Hutchins hesitated for just a second before slowly lowering himself back into his seat. His hands trembled as he gripped the table, his knuckles turning white. The entire courtroom was locked in stunned silence. Every eye was either on Tyler or his father. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Tyler felt his breath coming fast, but he forced himself to stand tall. His father's lawyer, a middle-aged man in an expensive navy blue suit, adjusted his tie and turned to the judge, forcing a smile. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The boy is confused. He's clearly under pressure." Tyler clenched his fists. "I'm not confused," he repeated, his voice steady. "I know exactly what I saw." James finally found his voice again, though it was lower now, seething. "Tyler, we'll talk about this at home. This isn't the place." Tyler ignored him. He turned to Richard Quinn, the man his father had painted as a thief, a fraud, a criminal. Quinn's eyes were wide, his posture stiff with disbelief. For years, Tyler had believed his father's version of the story. He had heard it countless times, how Quinn had betrayed their company, how he had embezzled funds and nearly ruined everything. But now, the truth was out, and the world wasn't bending to his father's will like it always had. Emily Carter, the defense attorney, leaned forward. She was the only person in the room who looked remotely composed. "Tyler," she said carefully, "you said you found the bank statements. Can you tell the court exactly what you discovered?" James's lawyer shot up. "Objection. This is completely improper. The boy's testimony has no basis in evidence." The judge held up a hand. "Overruled. The witness has made serious allegations. I want to hear what he has to say." He turned to Tyler. "Proceed." Tyler swallowed hard. His father's gaze was burning into him, but he refused to look in his direction. "A few days ago, I was in my dad's office," Tyler began. "He was out. I was looking for my laptop charger, but the bottom drawer of his desk was open. I saw a folder inside." He paused. It had financial records, transactions, large amounts of money being moved into offshore accounts. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at, but then I saw the name. His throat felt dry, but he forced himself to say it. "James Hutchins." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom again. James let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. A child digging through papers he doesn't understand." "I understand them," Tyler shot back. "I took photos. I double-checked. The money that went missing? It didn't disappear. It was funneled into your accounts, Dad." Emily's expression sharpened. "You have proof?" Tyler nodded. "It's on my phone." James's lawyer jumped in again. "Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate. A minor illegally accessing financial records? How can we even trust that he understands what he saw?" The judge turned to Tyler. "Do you have these photos with you now?" Tyler exhaled. "Yes, sir." The room shifted. Everything felt heavier, more real. The whispers had stopped. Everyone was waiting. James sat perfectly still. His face was unreadable now. But Tyler knew his father well enough to see the barely concealed fury behind his eyes. This wasn't a man being falsely accused. This was a man calculating his next move. Emily turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that the court allow us to review the photos immediately." James' lawyer shook his head. "This is absurd. We can't accept random photos off a phone as evidence." The judge considered this for a long moment. Then he exhaled. "Bring me the phone." Tyler pulled it from his pocket. His hands weren't shaking, but his heart was hammering against his ribs as he walked toward the bailiff and handed it over. The bailiff approached the judge, unlocking the screen, scrolling through the images under careful supervision. The judge leaned in, studying the files. The silence stretched unbearably. Finally, he looked up, his expression unreadable. He turned to James. "Mr. Hutchins, would you care to explain these documents?" For the first time, his father had nothing to say. The door slammed so hard the walls trembled. Tyler barely had time to turn around before his father was in his face, his breath hot with fury. James Hutchins wasn't just angry. He was something worse. He was cornered. "You ruined everything," James seethed, his voice low, controlled, but barely. His hands clenched at his sides, and his face was red with rage. Tyler didn't flinch. "Yeah, I told the truth." James took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes dark, calculating. "You think the truth will protect you?" For the first time, fear crept into Tyler's chest. He had seen his father angry before, seen him yell at employees, intimidate business rivals, even reduce grown men to silence with nothing but a look. But this was different. His father wasn't just angry, he was dangerous. "You're not going to scare me into lying," Tyler said, his voice steady, though his pulse was pounding in his ears. James smirked, a cold, knowing smirk. "You think I need to?" Tyler's stomach twisted. His father wasn't making empty threats. He was already planning his next move. James sighed, shaking his head like a disappointed parent. "You're a stupid boy, Tyler. You think standing up there in court, throwing your little tantrum, makes you some kind of hero?" Tyler clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "I think it makes me better than you." For a second, just a second, something flickered in his father's eyes. Surprise? Pain? But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced with something colder. "You don't understand what you've done," James said quietly. Tyler took a step back, putting distance between them. "I understand just fine." His father let out a slow, humorless chuckle. "Do you?" He turned away, exhaling like he was forcing himself to stay calm. "Do you know how many enemies I have? How many people would love to see me fall?" "You mean people like Richard Quinn?" Tyler shot back. James's jaw tightened. "People much worse than Quinn." He finally turned, his gaze sharp as a blade. "You think the reporters outside are your biggest problem? You think the law is going to keep you safe?" Tyler swallowed, but he didn't respond. James smiled again. That same smirk, the one that told Tyler he was already 10 steps ahead. "Go to bed, son," he said smoothly. "You'll understand soon enough." Tyler didn't sleep. He lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Every noise in the house made him jump. His father had never threatened him before, not like this. Maybe he was bluffing. Maybe. But Tyler had the sinking feeling that he wasn't. Tyler knew something was wrong the second he woke up. The house felt off. Too much noise outside, not enough inside. A heavy silence hung in the air. He rolled out of bed, grabbed his phone from the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls, texts. His heart pounded as he opened one. "Tyler, what the hell is going on? Your face is all over the news." His stomach dropped. He rushed to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch. And his worst fear came true. Reporters, dozens of them, camera crews, journalists with microphones. They swarmed the front of the house like vultures, shouting his name, flashing lights in every direction. Tyler's hands shook as he backed away. It was already happening. He heard voices downstairs, his father's, sharp and impatient, talking on the phone, making calls. Tyler had no idea who he was calling, but he had no doubt about what those calls meant. His father wasn't going to fight this in court. He was going to fight it his way, and Tyler had no idea if he'd make it out unscathed. Tyler sat motionless, his hands gripping the cold metal frame of the chair. The small, sterile office smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. Across from him, the federal agent studied him with a careful, measured gaze. The badge on his chest gleamed under the harsh light, the letters FBI unmistakable. "We've reviewed the documents you sent," the agent said, his voice steady but firm. "And your testimony in court has been extremely valuable." Tyler swallowed. His throat was dry, but he nodded. He knew what was coming next, but hearing it still felt unreal. "Your father has been taken into custody." The words hit harder than he expected. James Hutchins, the man who had built an empire, who had spent years untouchable, was now behind bars. "He'll be facing serious charges," the agent continued. "Fraud, embezzlement, perjury, and depending on what else we uncover, there could be more." Tyler barely registered the list of charges. He was too busy staring at the tabletop, his mind spiraling. It was over. The weight of it all sank into his chest. His father, the man who had once been his hero, was going to prison. A part of him had known this was inevitable. The moment he stood up in court and told the truth, he had set this in motion. But now that it was real, now that the consequences had finally caught up, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something he had spent his whole life believing in. The agent leaned forward slightly, his voice losing some of its authority. "You okay, kid?" Tyler hesitated before nodding. He wasn't sure if it was true, but it was easier than explaining everything he was feeling. "Will I have to testify again?" he asked quietly. The agent exhaled. "Maybe, if the case goes to trial." He studied Tyler for a moment, then softened. "But you did the right thing." Tyler let out a slow breath. The right thing. It didn't feel right. It felt like he had just cut the last string tying him to the life he used to have. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. His father had built his world on lies, on control, on fear, and Tyler had broken it apart with nothing but the truth. That had to mean something. His shoulders sagged, the tension in his muscles finally releasing. The agent stood, gathering a few papers into a file. "We'll be in touch if we need anything else." Tyler pushed himself up from the chair, feeling the exhaustion settle deep in his bones. He turned toward the door, then hesitated. Is my dad saying anything?" The agent studied him, then shook his head. "Not much. His lawyers are working hard, but it's going to be tough for him to get out of this one." Tyler nodded slowly. He didn't know if that made him feel better or worse. Stepping out of the office, he was met with an unexpected sight. Sunlight, bright, warm, cutting through the glass windows and flooding the room with golden light. For the first time in weeks, Tyler walked into it without fear.